and Kim Bach, plenty of the boys. We all did about an hour each, and it's put up on their website. It's at the University of Binghamton, New York, and the Southern Tier Lyme Support. And you can watch all three of those, or four of those talks, and they'll put you to sleep. It's great.
I am going to, God willing, post the talk tonight. And, but I do want you to be able to go to other websites because a lot of this gets pretty heady.
Yeah,
I mean,
I will try to keep it down, okay? I understand the
It
who I'm
gets
talking
pretty
to,
heavy.
and I can lose people real quickly. I'll try not to, so then some of you will be like residents and fall asleep, and I'll expect that, okay? I do have kids fall asleep in medical schools all the time when they listen to me. Is there any way we can turn that light down?
No, I'm sorry. There
Kill
is
one of
one
them?
light.
I'm never gonna see that.
Yep.
Woo!
Well,
Can we
if anybody,
adjust?
if you want to, we can leave it, and those are, green things are spirochetes inside a mouse. Okay, and I am, of course, Igenix Labs, Bob Jaguar, and we are going to talk about tick-borne pathogens, because that's why you're all here. So, as Alicia said, this is nature's dirty hypodermic needle. It carries up to 18 or 19 different diseases, not just Lyme, and it passes them on when it becomes engrossed or engulfed like this. Now, what happens with this tick, this is a scapularis or a deer tick as you all know it, and what happens is when it attaches, it gives a local anesthetic, it injects some cytokine suppressors, and it starts to form a cute little bubble of blood here. First thing it does after it does that is suck out blood. When it sucks blood out of its host, the temperature difference between the host's blood and the midgut of the tick is what actually activates all of these co-infections and the Borrelias that are in there. They become to life, they start to go out, they come out through the mouthpiece and form this cute little bubble of blood and start spreading around the host's body. So, there are people who will tell you, and I'll set it right up front, that are going to tell you it takes 24 to 36 hours to transmit this bug. Now, I will give you the only, I ran the university, outside the University of Connecticut, the micro-infectious disease lab called BBI Laboratories for 9 years. I was chief operating officer, okay? We did most of the Lyme testing for most of the people throughout New England, of course, in Connecticut. The only study ever done looking at tick transmission was done in a mouse. It was done by Ken Ligner, the boys down at Connecticut Agricultural Center, and they were veterinarians, so they had a whole bunch of mice, and what they did in 1990 is take a whole bunch of mice and stick 10 or 20 ticks on each one of them, and every hour they sacrificed a mouse. At 24 hours, every tick they found had transmitted Borrelia into the blood of the mouse. So from that point forward, all of the mice had Borrelia in them, and therefore, that's what happened. And that's the only study ever done on the transmission time that it takes for Borrelia or anything else to get in. Now, I have another good friend in Connecticut who we've pretty much proven this wrong, a guy named Charles Ray Jones. Some of you may have heard of him. He is a pretty well-respected pediatrician. He's seen probably 30,000 kids from around the world with Lyme. And he told me a number of times, we've talked, St. Raphael's is the hospital at Yale. There was a little girl just north of St. Raphael's outside of Connecticut on the border there, in Connecticut rather, outside New Haven. And one Saturday morning she went in out to play about 8:30 after taking her shower, her bath. Came in about an hour or two later at about 10:30 with a tick attached just above her right eye. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the little girl was forming a palsy in the right side of her face. Ran her into the emergency room at St. Raphael's, which of course said, can't possibly be Lyme disease. The tick was only attached for a couple of hours. We'll give you a neuroconsult for the next week, for Monday or Tuesday. Bring her back then. By 4 o'clock, the little girl couldn't walk, never mind talk, and so she called Charles Ray Jones, who has practice there, and on a Saturday evening, he went down into his office, met the mom and him, gave the little girl a bunch of antibiotics, a shot, which the little girl, of course, didn't like. Within 2 hours, the palsy was gone. Then he kept her on antibiotics for 3 to 4 weeks post. She never went for a neuroconsult. Now, you can tell me that wasn't Lyme disease, but what was it? So, okay, don't tell me it wasn't, but you gotta give me something else. So transmission time, and especially if any of you are hunters, if the tick was attached to a deer, it already has been transmitting things through its mouthpiece, Borrelia is already activated. If you think it's going to take 24 hours, you're sadly mistaken. It's going to transmit it the moment it starts attaching to you. So, we know that this is no longer a disease you get in certain parts of the seasons, just in the midsummer, early spring. It's now year-round. This is some of the talks about it getting there. And here, of course, are the other ticks that often get confused with it, and that's the dog tick. And down there is the deer tick. You can tell the deer tick, it's pretty sharp. Let's see if I can sharpen it up just a little. Yeah, that's going to sharpen it up. Yeah. Let's see if I can get this sharper.
Here, how about you turn
These little toys I get. Yeah, I can do it without my help.
Do you need a little more light?
How's that? Any better? No, I can.
Better?
No, it's got this cutesy little thing I can.
That's worse.
Don't we love Brookstone? Yeah, I used to have to carry one of those huge ones around with me, and getting it to airports today is a pain. So this is a cute little one, and it works reasonably well. Okay, so those are dog ticks and the deer tick down there. You may have seen this one around. It's called the Lone Star tick. This one is a hunter. Unlike the dog tick or the deer tick, which carries Lyme and other co-infections, this one won't just sit on a leaf and posture waiting for you to come by. It'll walk 20 or 30 feet looking for its next blood meal. So if it's in your yard, it's going to come right under your door, and guess what? It's going to carry all the same diseases that the deer tick does, and it will be delighted to transmit it to any host it finds inside the house. So, if you got good eyes, and I don't, you can still see this. This is an adult deer tick. You can see how small that is. And there are different stages, of course, that you probably all know about, from the larva stage right up through the adult. And we will talk about what happens as things go along. Now, I did some studying here a while ago, and actually on the plane here the other day, and I was looking at a number of things that are going on here. We do know that it's rampant, of course, in Wisconsin. Those of you sitting here don't know that, shouldn't be sitting here. And they actually found that 50% of the ticks in parts of Wisconsin back in 2013, this was a University of Wisconsin study. And of course, the most recent study in Eau Claire found that over 35% of the adult female ticks they collected had been positive, or were positive for Borrelia burgdorferi having them in them. Now that means you got a 30% chance of catching the disease if you get bit by a tick. That's exactly what that means. And guess what? This was the nymph stage. Double that number for percentage of ticks positive for adult ticks. We all know, well, the entomologists all know, that by the time it reaches an adult, more than double that number. So you're looking at 60 or 70% of the ticks now carrying at least Lyme here in your state. So what happens here? A mom and dad tick get together, usually on a Caribbean cruise they call a deer, and they fall in love and they mate, and the mom falls off, lays 2,000 eggs and promptly dies. So those 2,000 eggs turn into larvae in the early spring because they're usually near logs or under trees or along stone walls. They come to life and they go looking for their first blood meal, and voila, their first blood meal is usually one of these, a white-footed mouse. Now the white-footed mouse, if you ever see one and get close, will usually have 5 or 10 ticks attached to an ear. Now if any of the ticks, be they adult or nymph, that have Lyme disease attached, it now gets transferred to the other 10 or 20 ticks that are on that. So it goes from a 1 to 10 and 1 to 20 pretty quick. Now, what happens when it gets in there? Well, I'm going to show you the real deal here. This, in a minute, you're going to see some little white things. That is Borrelia burgdorferi. Whoopsie, why aren't you seeing what I'm seeing? Oh, you should be seeing that. Excuse me. Let me bring this down just for a second. I really want you to see this. Because this is the real deal. This white are Borrelia burgdorferi moving through a mouse. Okay? There you can see the spirochetal shape, helping it stay ahead of the immune response of the mouse and keeping itself alive as it spreads throughout the system of the mouse. That is what happens with Borrelia burgdorferi in every living organism. Welcome to science fiction in real life.
Yeah.
Okay? So, now that I sufficiently showed you what happens in the humans, what we would like to do in the world is we would really love, if we could, to take all of those mice and arm them. But here in the United States, it's illegal to give guns to anyone under the age of 2, so we're not allowed to arm the mice, and so they end up getting Lyme disease and passing it on. Now a tick, once it's got Lyme or whatever else is in that mouse into them, they'll drop off, and they'll wait a little while as they start to grow, and they'll become young adults. And now they're looking for something else to eat, something a little bigger, something a little more robust that they can feed off of. So they'll go find one of these, they'll go find one of these and bring it into your house. They'll even find one of these. Yes, that is a snake, and yeah, I'm terrified of them too, but I gotta feel sad for this guy. And they will attach to everything, but the reason we call them deer ticks is this is the animal they love to attack. At any one time, you'll find these guys roaming around. We passed 4 of them dead on the side of the road today. You've got a pretty good number of them here. And well, this tick, this is one of the deer that was out on Shelter Island. And when they killed it, they actually started counting the deer ticks on the back of its ear. They stopped at 375 on one ear. Your average deer is dirtier than your junkyard dog. It will carry a minimum of 300 ticks. And if one of those ticks has Borrelia burgdorferi, it's going to pass it to the other 300. So these deer are mass transit for Lyme disease. And they are bringing it all over your state because you got a lot of deer up here. And the deer population 100 years ago, according to the Department of Agriculture in DC, was less than 1 million deer in the entire USA. We had an ecosystem where we had mountain lions and coyotes, and they ate and killed a lot of the deer. Deer wanted to stay away from people's houses because people shot them and ate them, so the population was low. Then in 1918, it became illegal by U.S. government to shoot a gun anywhere near a house, and then a guy named Disney made it socially unacceptable in 1954, and now we've got 35 to 40 million of these large varmint running around. And the U.S. government says if you have more than 7 or 10 per square mile, you're going to start to see some of these animals die. You're going to start to see them because of starvation. They're going to come into your yards and eat all your arborvitaes and everything else you got. And the real problem really hits at 15. Well, how many of you got in your lovely state? You have 1,180,000 plus deer living in the state of Wisconsin. Congratulations. You kill 304 with your hunters a year, and car crashes, God only knows how many of those get killed. We know 4 of them got in the last couple of days right on the ride up here. So that means if you do the simple math, you have 22 deer per square mile, average. That is double the problem rate in the United States that you're going to see. So you wonder why you've got Lyme epidemic here? I'm sorry. This guy bringing it into your pool and into your house is doing it. So what we got to stop doing is getting them close to us. Okay? Having them in your house, feeding them pizza or pasta, or letting them watch big screen TV. I don't care if they're watching the Green Bay Packers or the Chicago Bears. You can't have them in there. You got to keep them out. Because what happens is this. And this is the most recent study. I was with Paul Mead he's with the Rocky Mountain CDC lab. Some of you may have seen him 2 years ago on TV because he was the big Ebola guy. Well, Paul gave a talk about 6 months ago at Mass General up in Boston to a bunch of us who think we know something about Lyme, which we really don't. But he did get up there and talk about the most recent maps from the CDC, and voila, where it's going to be next year and the year after. This disease is not only going to go away, it's going to continue to grow and in exponential levels. And I'm going to show you what's going to happen because of a new Borrelia that we're finding throughout the United States, at least on the East Coast and the West Coast now. We're picking it up in a lot of PCR testing. So, in Minnesota, yeah, they got an epidemic area there. And here is your most recent data. Voila. It's just, the reason you don't have it down in the, down here, I think, is because that's Chicago, and they don't believe anything. If you go to the infectious disease departments there, they're up in the sky in their ivory towers, so they don't really deal with patients. And if they don't want to believe in a disease, well, you're not allowed to have it. So, how bad is it? At least you've got some estimation of what they say is the incident per 100,000, but it's not real good. And of course, Paul Mead has been doing the hubba talk for the last 2 years now, saying now, oh, well, we're probably a factor of 10 wrong. There's not 30,000, there's probably at least 300,000 cases in the United States. and your infection rate is way underreported here. So, what does that mean? Well, according to Paul Mead, the top 7 nationally notifiable infectious diseases are chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, and you can read them down. If you add the 0 to Lyme, all of a sudden it's more prevalent than gonorrhea here in the United States. It is the second most reportable. HIV is only 35,000 cases. See, I saw a sign today for warning about the Zika virus.
Yeah.
We've had 20 cases in the United States. For God, you know,
Oh my God.
at what point do we stop avoiding, never mind, we'll worry about that. Paul also presented this in his Hubba talk about backtracking, how, well, we use surveillance criteria and it's only supposed to be for the, the tip of the iceberg. We're not supposed to see that much of it. So that you're using the wrong data. So then he went up and he put up a slide, and this one I have to show because I love this slide. It's from the CDC. But to the right here is a Western blot result, and I'll talk about what those mean. But what you don't see that that a good friend of mine, a pathologist out on Long Island, saw when we were sitting there and I wasn't paying attention because I had been at Mass General too many times, sitting at too many talks and semi-sleeping. He hit me with his elbow and says, "Hey Bob, where'd that Western blot come from?" That's an Igenix Western blot. Okay, the CDC put it on their slide, and yet they're the guys who tell you that Igenix doesn't know what they're doing. So they used it on their slide, but I guess this slide, which is from my presentations over the last 8 years, or 10 years that I've been doing this, that's the slide I've been using. He just kind of borrowed it. So I borrowed this, which is, if Paul has a problem with that, I've got to go out in January to the Fort Collins and have a little discussion with a few people there, and we'll discuss the slide presentations. So as I told you, or you heard, my background is in molecular biology. I did work with some guys, a couple have won the Nobel Prize in years since, and they're off making millions and I'm doing this. But that's okay, I was a grunt. And what we do know about Borrelia is how big it is. It is by far the largest, most aggressive spirochete in the world. This is often compared by doctors as being no more than syphilis. Syphilis has 7 genes. This has 123 so far, plus plasmids. It is 1/4 the size of your genome. It is more capable to beat your immune system than any other bug we have ever seen. And yet it gets dispelled as not being a problem. To add insult to injury, we now know there are at least 37 different species of this. We know 7 of them can cause problems in humans here, especially in the United States. Now, they are the one Willie got named after. He named Billy Dorfer, he found it. And so they named that one. Lone Starry, which we find all over the Midwest. Then you've got the 2 European strains that are both here in the United States now, because I'm PCing them out at our laboratory on a regular basis. And then there is the Mayoni strain. Now, back in February, the Mayo Clinic in there, oh, they're so cute. They got up and published in the New England Journal of Medicine how they had found a new strain of Lyme disease and they were going to name it after themselves, which is, of course, not being too arrogant. They did it, and they called it the Mayoni. But I do have a friend of mine named Schwan out in Fort Collins who threw it against 93,000 samples from around the United States, and he found it in 4 cases. So the Mayoni strain is not here. Hermsii is. I'm picking it up all over from Fond du Lac all the way down into Illinois. And I'll be delighted to answer your questions when we're done, if that's okay.
Oh, no, that's just the one I have.
Oh,
That's all.
okay. And then there is the new strain. It isn't here yet. It will be here 2 years from now. And I'm warning you very seriously how bad this strain is. Miyamoto was found 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, actually it was found in Russia by, as you can tell, a Japanese researcher who they named it after. But the trouble with this one, it is transmitted from the mom into the eggs. So it goes from 1 to 2,000, not 1 to 10 or 20. And so we have seen this go almost exponentially on the East Coast, be it in Maine all the way down to New Jersey, where 3 and 4 years, 3 years ago we started to see little of it. I know the guys at Yale's L2 lab picked up 5 or 10 cases down in Jersey Shore. We were picking it up a little bit with a PCR test. Then about a year ago, 2 years ago, we started to take it real seriously. With the help of the CDC, we actually developed a serology test, and we do have a new Western blot that does pick this up. The routine testing does not, and I'll show you what that's going to mean. So, what does this all go on to? Well, this, I'm not going to show you the video of this, but this is a Borrelia burgdorferi using the spirochetal shape to drill its way out of a blood vessel in a mouse. And it actually is about a 20-second video where you actually see it drilling forward, drilling back, drilling forward until it gets out of the blood system, forms a cyst, and goes into hiding. And that is the biggest problem. This bug is very, very smart. It's not going to hang around in your blood. It's not going to, for obvious reasons. You've got T cells, B cells, natural killer cells, and other immunological actions that are all being addressed toward this thing that's not supposed to be there. So why be there? It can go hide in the blood, out of the blood, and have a nice happy life. And that's what happens in the first slide I showed you. All of these green spots are Borrelia outside of the blood vessel of the mouse. So, your physicians, now you're going to learn a little bit about testing, and you're going to know more about lab testing when you leave here than most of your doctors concerning Lyme disease. So please have some patience. They don't want to listen. But you're going to have to, because I got you in the room. But they do, some of them, I shouldn't say that. Okay, so Immunology 101, in the first week of med school, a doctor learns this. You get attacked by a bug, 2 to 3 weeks later, you start to have what's known as an IgM, early response from your body. Your T cells see this bug, pick it up, send it back up to your lymph nodes, they start building immunological response, which are initially called IgMs. Your IgM is a stronger, bigger attack. It's sort of like, if you were using a gun, it would sort of be like a scatter gun. Then what happens, while the NK cells and your T cells are all attacking this strange organism that's found its way into your blood and into your body starts to produce what's known as an IgG, which is like a long-range shotgun, one that's like a sniper would use. And it is very targeted, and it will build IgG response antibodies that you will keep in your body for years post-infection. Always looking around, watching for it. But the trouble with this is Borrelia never went to med school, so it doesn't pay attention. So, I tell doctors all the time, when you see this, do not test. There is virtually no test you can get positive, but there is one if you don't like your patient. It's called a puncture biopsy. You take it right at the shot, you take a piece of the skin, you send it in and have a PCR done, molecular test looking for the DNA, and we usually can find it. Now, all of these slides I'm going to show you, the next 4 or 5, were all negative, not only by Igenix, but by Quest and LabCorp and local laboratories all over the country. You're not going to get a positive lab test when you see this rash. Okay? And what does medicine want you to do? You walk in, you got the rash, we got to do a test to prove it's Lyme. Yep. And you're going to get a negative test. It's just the immunological response of the body has not mounted strong enough at that point to give you enough antibodies to give us a positive serology Western blot, or ELISA or Western blot test. So here we have negatives. Now all of these people were proven positive because we are a little sadistic, and we did take puncture biopsies, and we did do PCRs, and prove that the DNA of Borrelia burgdorferi was in these patients, in this patient, in these, in all of these, and not in these. Because this is ringworm, which is scaly, and if they tell you it hurts, it's usually a spider bite, so those aren't it. So I have an old friend we share slides, some of you may have heard of Joe Burriscano, and Joe gave me some hints years ago, back when I was much younger and probably a whole lot wiser. He used to look at the patient's ears, and or around the nipple would be raised in red. If that happens 1 to 3 weeks post-infected bite, you probably have disseminating Lyme. And it's one of the hints that he always used. He always looked at the patient, even months later, patients would get these red lobes or around their nipples raised in red. So, when they see that, you can go with the, as she mentioned, the ILADS approach, which is to actually treat it until the patient gets better, or you can just look around at the symptoms and say, well, you got a rash, maybe it's Lyme, you got some neck pain. One of the other hints I give people, You don't wanna do lab testing? You think somebody's just come down with Lyme disease? Every morning around 10 o'clock, 3 hours after eating, 2 or 3 hours, you take the temperature. Take it again around 3 in the afternoon. Do that for 5 days in a row. If you have a subnormal temperature in the morning and it's 101 in the afternoon, more than likely, you better be tested for Lyme. So it's a good way of gauging for yourself before you get terrified that you've gotten Lyme disease again or have it still. You may want to consider that. That's a pretty good option that Joe used to always use. And of course, if it's moving around, if this week your knee hurts and last week your elbow hurt, that's Borrelia, that's not arthritis. Arthritis doesn't move. So if you've got a pain in your, a little pinky, like I often get, that literally is arthritis setting in. And it's not Lyme. It's not moving. If it was moving around, you'd have Lyme disease, and I'd be able to take some good antibiotics from one of my buddies. So, late Lyme, yes, it does cause cardiac problems. 3 years ago, the CDC sent out a note, a letter warning all cardiologists in the United States that if you have a patient, you live in an endemic area, they have a cardiac arrhythmia that you can't explain, you better be testing them for Lyme disease. They noted 6 cases of middle-aged, normally healthy people who just dropped dead, and on autopsy found Borrelia burgdorferi all over the muscle of the hearts of the people, and that's what killed them. So it will cause serious issues, and of course we know about the palsies and the neurologicals. Some of you may already be suffering from some of those in the brain. So, why do we test? Well, if it doesn't work in the beginning, well, we want to make sure that everyone with MS actually has the disease, and that those being treated for chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia aren't just being dismissed and put into a bowl to be treated with symptom drugs. And most importantly, we don't want anyone thinking they have arthritis if they have Lyme. Because the first thing your rheumatologist is going to do is stick you on a steroid, and for the first 3 weeks you're going to feel better, because that'll reduce your inflammation, and then you just let Borrelia burgdorferi loose in your body and helped it as it spread around by suppressing your immune response. So, where did all of this problem start? Well, we've got to go back a few years. Back in 1994, when I was much wiser and younger, I was allowed or invited with a number of us from the University of Connecticut and other centers, about 500 of us who thought we knew something about Lyme, to a CDC meeting in Tick-Borne, Michigan, put on by them and the Association of State Territorial Public Health Laboratories. What happened at the meeting, the CDC got up front and said, okay, you guys from all over the USA, you guys are running laboratories, do a pretty good job in infectious diseases and micro. You've been doing a great job with hepatitis for the last 10 years and for HIV. I want you to do the same thing. Use a 2-tier approach. Do an ELISA screen test, followed by a prime or Western blot to confirm what you're doing. Now, we weren't allowed, because we were at University of Connecticut, we weren't allowed to sit with the guys from Yale. That's a whole other story. But the guys at the Yale table, even Alan Steer, bless his little heart, raised his hand and said, wait, these tests for Lyme disease don't work. We're nowhere near of the capabilities of our HIV testing. So they coined the phrase, surveillance criteria. And to this day, your State Department of Health website, and every website in the United States, including the CDC's, has that statement at the bottom. The 2-tier approach that you are using should not be used for clinical purposes. What does your doctor do? What does every medical center do? They use the 2-tier approach for clinical diagnostic purposes. And yet, the CDC, even back in 1994, was telling people don't do it. So the doctors have a problem in the waiting room, and it ain't a 300-pound gorilla, okay? It's the tick sitting on the table right next to it, okay? So what happens is the patient walks in, and looks like Lyme, feels like Lyme, but the test result came back negative. Now what are you going to do? Because if you're a primary care guy and you're going to treat the patient with a negative lab test, somebody from the infectious disease department or your Department of Health or somebody who just doesn't like you is going to come and knocking at the door. And they're going to tell you, you're making a mistake here and you've got to cut it out, or you're going to see a medical review board soon. So, Lyme ILADS was built, the International Lyme Associated Disease Society, in 2001. You can probably guess which group I'm with. and this is the two convergent reports. Physicians now have a choice. They can either follow the IDSA guidelines and tell you that, okay, we can put this in a box and cure you in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or they can treat you individually as a human being and treat you till you get better, which we find most ILADS doctors do. But like I said, if you go to your primary care at the major teaching institution because he belongs to a huge group and your insurance makes you go there, this is what you get. And it's, hey guys, don't worry about it. You may have Lyme disease, even if the test comes back, you don't have it. I don't believe in it, don't worry about it. We'll give you some analgesics, we'll give you some psychosomatic drugs, and we'll send you on your way. So, at the meeting at Tick-Borne, besides doing that, they the instituting the two-tier approach. They did a few other things that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. First of all, an old friend of mine passed away, Ed Masters. Ed was the guy who found what we used to call Masters disease at Cape Girardeau, Missouri, because of course there's no Lyme disease in Missouri. And so Ed used to always say to me, Lyme is a clinical diagnosis till you make it, then it becomes a political statement, and it still is, even in your state. So, we call Masters disease today, it was changed over in 2003 to be called Lone Star Eye. But it is actually, originally we called it Masters. Because interesting enough, I was, of course, the molecular guy, and my laboratory director from the University of Connecticut was dean and all kinds of. We both showed up to defend him in front of the medical review board in St. Louis, which dragged him up there saying, you're diagnosing Lyme, there's no Lyme in Missouri. I kind of proved that we saw it in ticks, and you know, DNA is DNA is DNA, and you got it. And Ed just stood up and said, look, you guys don't want to call it Lyme disease, we'll call it Masters. And so then in 96 rather, we started calling it Masters, and for 5 or 6 years that's what it was known as. So it's now known as Lone Star Eye. So, regardless of that trivia, most screening tests you get from a micro and infectious disease lab have a sensitivity of 100%. What does that mean? Sensitivity means if it even looks like a distant relative from way at the other part of the, it's going to come back positive. Because you don't want to get a false negative. You'd rather get a false positive in a two-tier approach, which is appropriate, because you're going to trade that off by doing a second test or a confirmatory test. Specificity is exactly what it sounds. That's the disease. I am looking at a bug, and it absolutely is Borrelia burgdorferi. In the testing we do in screening, you can't have 100 of both. The immunology 101 won't let you do that. Science won't let you do it, and I'll show you why that happens in a minute. So, for most screening tests, hepatitis, HIV, other things, your sensitivity is right about 100%. For Lyme disease, it ranges anywhere from 50 to 70 in virtually every test I've seen in the United States. So the screening tests miss a lot. Now, why do they do that? Well, this is a 96-well plate. And in a laboratory, this is what we use in a micro and infectious disease lab or an immunology lab to do testing. And what we do is, the manufacturer gives us a bunch of what we call known bug, the antigen itself. And what we do is you take that antigen, or they do, and they pipette it into one of these 96-well plates, right up against the wall. Then, when it gets to the lab, your serum comes in, we clean it up a little bit, the lab cleans it up, they pipette it in and put it right on top into that same well. Now what we're hoping for will happen is that the antibodies in your serum will find the antigens that match them, that they would have attacked out in the wild, shall we say, in your blood, but now it's still alive and vibrant. That's why you got to get blood healthy to the lab so that it's still robust. It allows those antibodies to find and match themselves up and bind and do what we call an immune complex, the antigen to the antibody, form a nice strong immune complex. And in most situations, that immune complex is bigger, and the trouble here is where Lyme hits. Borrelia burgdorferi, not only does symptoms look like a lot of other things, but in a laboratory test it does. So does its antibodies and its antigens. And so what happens is your serum starts attacking or partially other antibodies for other diseases you've had in the last 3 to 5 years are all going to try to bind to the limited number of antigens in there. And they're not going to form strong immune complexes, but they are going to form partial complexes and block binding sites on the antigens along the wall so that real antibodies, if you got them to Lyme, can't find a place to bind. And what's our next step? The next step in the laboratory is a wash cycle. And the wash cycle will remove anything that's not strongly bound together, antibody and antigen. So even if you are producing antibodies, they are not going to find a place to bind, and they're going to get washed out and go right down the sink. Fourth step, we use a second antibody with a fluorescent tag, and all that looks for is an immune complex between the antigen and the antibody from the first step. And if it sees them, it binds them. And it tags onto them, it grabs on, and when it grabs on, it's got this cute little fluorescent tag, and it waves at the microscope or at the machine that's reading it and says, hey, we're here! And that means we get a positive lab test. But if you can't find anything to bind to, you get the negative. And that's what happens with an ELISA assay. Okay? So it's not just me telling you these tests, or even the CDC weren't good. The College of American Pathology, years ago, concluded that the ELISA assay should never be used for the diagnosis of Lyme disease because of the complexity of the bug. The most recent study by an old friend of mine, Steve Dumler. Steve was a friend of mine when he lived and worked at the University of Maryland. Then he went over to the second coming over there at Johns Hopkins and became Associate Chief of Medicine there, Pathology and Laboratory Medicine and Infectious Diseases. And he did a study about 3 years ago with the blessing and the funding from the National Institutes of Health. And he looked at 1,700 people from all the Lyme clinics in Johns Hopkins, which are 5 of them, around the state of Maryland. Took the 1,700 patients, ran ELISAs, Western blots, PCR, even a culture in-house on all of them. When they looked back, the Quest LabCorp test was right 45% of the time. That means if you really want to save money, pull the quarter out of your pocket if you think you got Lyme and flip it. You're going to get a right answer half the time, which is better than the lab test. And that's one of the better studies. And that's from Hopkins, published in Journal of Clinical Microbiology, which is the 4th largest medical journal in the world. Okay? So, this is Jennifer Halsey last year at the primary care doctors meeting. She's the head of the Anthropod Disease Program in New York State, saying not only are our tests bad, if the patients had antibiotic therapy or a vaccine for anything, we may have an even worse test. And then she added this one. We may not even be looking at the right antigens. And there. So please remember, the most dangerous test result is the false negative. Now, I'm not going to bore you with immunofluorescence testing, because we do it, and a couple of the major laboratories will do it for Lyme. It works reasonably well. It is good if your doctor wants to use a screen test. It is better than anything else on the market right now. It was actually developed by, this test was actually developed and first used at Yale when Alan Steer was a young pup and had just found Lyme, and of course ruined all the prices of homes in Connecticut for it. So he actually used an IFA screen, and it's a technique that works very well, but it's very expensive, so most routine labs don't like to do it. So, but I really want to talk to you about the more important test, and that's a confirmatory Western blot. That's the test that in endemic areas for Lyme should be the primary test that doctors use. But not every Western blot is the same, and the procedure can bore you to death, but I'll bore you through it real quickly, so before you all fall asleep on me. What happens in a Western blot is a piece of jello. We, the manufacturer, or whoever is building this thing, takes all the antigens that we think are specific for Lyme, or whatever these are looking for, stick them in this vat, in a nice bowl, put in this polyacrylamide gel, which, when you mix it all up, gets all of these antigens spread around nice and homogeneously, all through it. Cool it off like you would a nice jello mold, and make it about 1/2 inch thick, make it about 8 inches square, and then put 8 slots down it, excuse me. And all of those slots at the very top, when you put it between 2 pieces of glass so it doesn't fall over, you put it up on its side, and on those slots that run down, you pipette in the human's serum, the patient's, between 2 and 7, 1 and 8 you use for controls. And what happens is when you put a positive charge up there, your antibodies are all positively charged. And what they do is not only by gravity, but trying to get away from the heat at the top, they will start running down through this blot. Now, I always use that The smaller, healthier guys, they can run down the block, they go way down it. The bigger, chubbier ones can't get through the jello and they stop. Disconnect it. And when you disconnect the power and you lay this thing on its side, all of those antibodies, which you've now spread by size, which we actually call molecular weight, will actually now try to bind to the antigens that match them throughout the block. And what they'll do, if they find one near them, they'll bind. And they'll form a cute little immune complex. And then, in photography, you used to use photographic plates. We still do in this test technique. And what happens is that blot turns into a blob. A real cute little mark, which you can see up there in blue already forming in that one. And those are what we call bands. So, when the doctor says, oh, you have bands 41, 34, 38, 39 rather, those are bands that are specific in most cases to Lyme disease. Now 41 is not, it's a flagella, but 31 most of the time is, 34 is absolutely. Now, so that's what a Western blot is. But back in Tick-Borne, there was a few other changes made. There were 3 major research groups in the United States in 1994 chasing Lyme disease, studying it to a serious extent. One was at Stony Brook, one was with the group at Yale under Alan Steer, and the other one was out with Willie Verdorfer, of course, at the CDC labs up in Fort Collins. So, the CDC said, look, you can use any one of these 3 strains, because they do cross-react with all the strains of Lyme that we knew at the time, and you can use any one of them in a lab test as long as you do that if you want to sell it in the United States. So, they arrived and said you can use Willie's strain, that was published in 94, or 92 rather. You can use the N40 from the guys at Westchester, and of course also at Yale. And you could use the 297, which was the one being run and developed at Stony Brook out on Long Island, in Dr. Lightly. So what does Igenix do that's different? Most of the kit, all of the kits in the United States use the B31 strain, because it's well sequenced, well known, not necessarily robust. We at Igenix use 2 strains, 297 and 431, and this expression, which you can't read, which I understand you shouldn't have to, tells you that some bands show up stronger with certain strains, others show up with the other, so by using both, we get a nice clear presentation. Now, there's another difference. The meeting in Tick-Borne, Michigan, they took out those 2, 31 and 34, from all the testing in the United States, if you were going to use an FDA-approved kit. Why did they do that? There was a vaccine put on the market in 1996 by a company called SmithKline. It was called the Lyme vaccine. It was a whole cell lysate vaccine that was based on using the 31 OSPE site. All that means to you is that it targeted the presence of that antigen size in its vaccine if it ever showed up in your body. So you were getting a vaccine looking for the OSPE. And I have doctors today who had the vaccine back in the 90s when it was on the market that are still coming up positive with OSPE, 31. So it worked, but the second company, the reason they took out 34, BioMed-EU, a huge pharmaceutical and a multi-billion-dollar baby too, was developing one using the OSPE site. So they took them both out as of that mid-October in 1994. You could not sell an FDA-approved kit in the United States and use it for Lyme disease if either of those or both of those were in your test. They reduced the specificity and the sensitivity of a Western blot significantly when they did that. Actually, they reduced the specificity by well over 30%. So, they took them out, and that's why Igenix, in our criteria, if you ever see our test result, we've got them both. We put the CDC criteria, which says you got to have 2 of these to be positive for an active infection. We keep them in, and for some reason they didn't want to put 8393 back then. They now know it is, and at one point in the next millennium, they'll need to put it back in. So we picked 2 of any of these on the right that we know is specific for Lyme disease, except again, the 41, which is a flagella, which appears with almost all the bacteria that might be in your body. And you've got a lot of bacteria in your body. So most people will come back positive with the 41 flagella. So an IgG, no one knew in '94 really, even though we, sitting in our ivory towers, thought we did. We didn't really know what the long-term implications immunologically were going to be of this disease. So they said, pick 5 of 10 of immune response antibodies, and voila, you got Lyme disease. That's an active infection. Well, the ones in green cross-react with a number of the co-infections and other diseases, be it chlamydia pneumoniae, mycoplasma, and a host of others, Epstein-Barr, that we've now found in publications through the last 20 years are cross-reactivity. But the CDC never moved on, never changed it. Their criteria is the same. You've got to have 5 of those bands, and you could have 5 that have nothing to do with Lyme. So you could get a false positive using the CDC criteria. The bands we use, other than 41, are absolutely specific to an exposure from Lyme. Doesn't mean you have the disease, but you at least had an exposure. So when you've got those bands there, 2 or more, you have an active infection of Borrelia burgdorferi. So here's how smart this bug is. Alan Steer published back in the 80s that he was seeing people who'd had Lyme for 3-4 years, all still showing up after he treated them with IgMs later, 3-4 years, 5 years later. What's going on? He couldn't figure it out. Well, he should have, because Stevenson and his group down at the University of Kentucky, or what do we know? They're down in Kentucky. They're not the New England Medical Center or Mass General. They can't possibly know science. But they published, and this was the original study, it's called quorum sensing. What the bug does when it comes back, I showed you how it goes into the tissue. When it comes back into your body, into your blood, it changes its outer surface presentation of its proteins. What that means, people call it masking. What it really is doing is it's folding over its outer shell as it comes out and turns back into the spirochetal form. And your body's immune system is looking to read what's on the surface of that to see if it knows what it is. And now all of a sudden it's different. It's not the one it saw 2 years, a year ago, and now you get a new IgM response. This is what we call an IgM reactivation. Or, if you're an IDSA guy, it's not Lyme disease. Okay, it's post-Lyme syndrome. Okay, it's post-Lyme treatment syndrome, which makes absolutely no sense. Because an IgM is positive, it is an active infection. Now, I can't often tell you whether it's a new infection or an old with our test, but I can tell you it's an active infection. And that's why many of your doctors will be wanting to use this. Now, since 1986, there's been a huge amount, well, a fair amount of study on Lyme disease. The NIH doesn't believe in it, so they don't fund it. So we are finding, here you can see all of the antibodies that have been associated with Lyme disease in any major research study published in a peer-reviewed article anywhere in the United States for the last 25 years. So the ones that are specific are the 23, 31, 34, 39, and 83, 93. We know that. They have been proven to be exactly to that, and the CDC knows it. So, how good is Igenix testing? Because, oh God, your primary care is going to tell you, oh, Igenix only gives positive lab tests. First of all, no lab could keep its CLIA license by doing that, ever. CLIA tests us every 6 months at the most. We have tested by every state in the United States with unknowns and positives. Here is how good we performed in the last 10 years with the New York State Department of Public Health's proficiencies. We have gotten the right answer 99% of the time. And of course, our QC is done across town. We're in Palo Alto, so there's a little medical center that isn't, of course, Harvard, but it is Stanford Medical Center. And they send us unknown positives and negatives all the time, and our QC has given no false positives. They tell us we've given no false positives since 2001 even. So, when your doctor says Igenix is wrong, they're kind of not looking at the data. Not from any Department of Public Health or licensing organization here in the United States. They're talking off the top of their head or out of the fear of the infectious disease guy. So, here's where the rubber really hits the road. Here's a woman, 35 years old, outside of Boston, right in an endemic area, like here, for you. She had 3 young kids. She went to her primary in June, had flu-like symptoms. So he did a test for Lyme and it came back negative. This isn't it. A Quest routine test. Came back negative. So we sent her home, just called her and told her to take some analgesics, some Tylenol or whatever else, and she'd be fine. 2 months later, she came back feeling much worse. Now he sends her to a rheumatologist who ran up about a $3,000 bill in lab work. Found absolutely nothing wrong. ANA is perfect, rheumatoid factor perfect, blood counts, everything's fine. Back she goes to the primary. She's feeling worse. Sends her to an old colleague, who I won't mention his name, in Boston, and he's an infectious disease specialist in Lyme, who promptly called the MD back and said to him, why are we going up? What's happening? Why are we losing power?
It's low power.
Well, let me see. I get this back.
Do you need a light, Bob?
No, let me see what am I not seeing this? That is positive. Let's disconnect this one. See if I get power. Is it still plugged in? Maybe not. Did we turn off the power? Did we turn off the light? Did we turn off the power? Oh. Did we turn off the power when we turned off the light? Thank you.
Good morning.
Is that light going on? We're not getting any power. Oh, there it is. Now I got power.
Got it?
Yeah, it'll be on in a second. Let's hit it again. Come on, give me back the light. We now know that the bottom light here, the battery went dead because the bottom power cord is not on when the lights are on. Okay? And we're going to go back to this slide in a moment. I'm going to take this down just for a minute.
Oh.
How are we doing?
Okay, hi.
Hey, we got a light show. Okay, let's see if I can let it find it. Come on. Find it. Oh, it's hiding like Borrelia. Okay, let's see if we can do that. Hey, just like in the movies. Here we go. Okay, bing, bing, okay. I have done this way too many times. Okay, so, come on, come on. Okay, so back to this poor lady. She ended up with the infectious disease guy calling back her primary and warning him that he was going to bring him before a medical review board. There's nothing wrong with this woman. And he told her to give her Prozac, give her Oxycontin, and never call him again, and hung up on her. Woman came back a month later to the primary in a wheelchair. 35-year-old woman. Now, the primary is terrified. This looks like MS. He can't find anything else wrong with her. Sends her to a neurologist, and by pure happenstance, that neurologist had been at rounds at his hospital the morning I gave a talk 6 months before. And he snickered and said, I'm going to prove that little schmuck from MIT wrong. I'm going to split this sample and I'm going to show him this can't be Lyme disease. Because that's what the woman was saying. It's probably, what if it's Lyme? It's not MS. So he split the sample. This is the test result from Quest, because that was the insurance provider that he used. It had no, oh, excuse me, that's not it. This is the Quest result. It had 0 bands in the Western blot. Because he didn't follow the CDC criteria, he is about to make a major diagnosis of MS in a young woman, and he wants to make absolutely certain, so he went beyond the CDC criteria and ordered Western blots. He got no bands with them. Our sample. Here you can see the woman had bands, whoops, 39, 41, and 58. That's positive by Igenix criteria. Uh-oh, got an IgG, maybe long-term Lyme. But her IgM, she had bands 31, 34, 39, 41, and 83, 93. She had 5 of the 6 bands related to Lyme in an IgM active infection. So instead of being put on MS drugs for the next 30 years until she died, she actually was put on IV Rocephin within a week and followed up for about a month with that, and then went to 2 different oral antibiotics to kill all forms in a nice cocktail. And 3 months later, she was out of the wheelchair, and a month after that, she got rid of her cane, and she was back yelling and screaming and getting yelled at by her kids. So that's the kind of patient that comes to Igenix. It is the patient that's been to 2, 3, 4 doctors, been told they have nothing wrong with them, or whatever it is, it's all in their head, and they end up either believing that ivory tower people, or going to web and finding groups like yours, and say, oh my, maybe it's Lyme. So, I tell doctors all the time, if you want to keep using Quest or LabCorp, you can. Understand that if you do the ELISA and the Western blot together, you're going to get the right answer 3 out of every 4 patients. So all you got to do, doctor, is figure out which one of those 4 is wrong. It's real simple. You pick it. Now, some people try to tell me there's no such thing as a false negative serology. Well, I have an old friend, Steve Phillips, brilliant internist, Yale trained, even though he's not massive. I understand, he's down at Yale. I'm a Boston guy, what are you going to do? But he actually has done, we've got over 60 or 70 major publications that show you can get a negative serology in a Lyme patient. And it's not from us, okay? Here we are from the Journal of Clinical Micro, JAMA, Ophthalmology. Here's 3 more. Ray Dotweiler, one of the writers of the IDSA guidelines that tells you there's no such thing as chronic Lyme. Chronic Lyme cannot be excluded in the absence of antibodies. In the New England Journal of Medicine by Ray. Here's Sam Donta finding a bunch of it under the without CDC criteria, and another one in the Annals of Internal Medicine. I have over 60 of these, and I don't want to put anybody to sleep, so we know it's here. So the major strains that are here, the biggest one we're worried about is that little one in green, because it's coming. And how bad is it going to be? Krauss published on it, as I mentioned, out of Yale 3 years ago now, saying that we better be watching for the prevalence of this in endemic areas for Lyme. Guess what, people? This is an endemic area for Lyme. You have over 25 cases per 100,000 patients. That is fully endemic by CDC criteria. So you have an endemic area, and Brian Fallon recently warned us in a major talk that he gave people, the problem is that the diagnosis is going to get missed. First of all, the testing's not going to see it because the doctors ain't even going to bother looking for it. So they're going to look at Lyme, looks like Lyme, feels like Lyme, do a test, even if they send it to Igenix, or the patient has a strong enough immune system to give an antibody response and get a positive from Quest or LabCorp, it's still going to come back negative. Because they don't have Borrelia burgdorferi, they got Miyamoto, which produces a whole different set of antibodies, and you have to use a whole different test. Luckily, Igenix spent about 2 years with the CDC help, honest to God, and we have developed a serology test now for it in our relapsing fever. And this is just the note from the New Hampshire Department of Health that everywhere to the south of New Hampshire's got this, but we don't. So, relapsing fever is it, and this is just showing how accurate the test is. So, you can do a lot of testings. I didn't talk about the C6 ELISA, probably because I helped develop it with Andy Levin at Mass General. We did some of the submissions for that. The C6 ELISA assay is what LabCorp likes to use as a screen test, and it is a little better than the standard ELISA, but then again, so is flipping a quarter. So it's not a real good answer. So I don't tell people, those are the tests that are available, but I honestly tell you, you really should be doing a good Western blot. And I'm sorry to say, if it's not going to Stony Brook or to Igenix, we're the only 2 labs doing our own in-house test anymore that test for OSPE and OSPE. Everybody else, they're going to get a Mardix or a Meridian blot, and it's going to come back without 3134 on the B31 strain, and I know exactly what it's looking for. So, why don't we just go looking for the bug itself? That's what everybody asks. Well, let's find the bug. Well, it hides. There's not enough of it around. Here it is, 1 strand in this piece of tissue. Now, in the blood, it's even less prevalent. So you can't find it. So we in the lab, being the arrogant that we are, think we can find it by using all kinds of cute things. Be it staining, be it culturing, being it fluorescent in situ hybridization, all PCR, all these wonderful things. And we're going to talk about PCR and its limitations and where it works. But all in all, it's still looking for a needle in the haystack. Okay? So, let's talk about PCR. Here is Bayer and his group out of the University of Michigan. He looked at a bunch of patients who had Lyme disease and looked in their urine to see if he could find Borrelia using PCR. And he found it in 70% of the cases. We don't get that kind of number. It's never that high. We usually get in the 30 to 40 range positivity rate, unless you are very, very sick. If the patient's immune system has already been beaten up, their cytokines aren't working right, their T cells aren't working right, they're cross-checking each other off. You got an IL-10 going up, and you got all kinds of wonderful things going on. You short-circuit the person's immune system, you're getting sicker and sicker, your body can't fight it. In those cases, Borrelia comes out of the tissue, runs around the blood, free and clear, because there's nobody there to hurt it, and that's when we can pick it up in a PCR. Okay? So that's why, if you are very sick, many of your doctors will want to use the complete Lyme panel from Igenix. They want to do a PCR. And as Ken Ligner told me a number of times last week in ILADS, he loves Igenix's PCR because we do a couple things different that I'll show you. But more importantly, because he's right up the road from the Westchester Medical Group and Gary Wormser et al., he likes to have a positive PCR if he can in a patient, because it's really hard to argue with a positive PCR. It's like going into a court of law and the defendant saying, I wasn't there. I could not have done that crime. And then the prosecutor pulls up the DNA result and says, you said you were 2,000 miles away. I got a PCR that shows you had your DNA in that room. Well, how did we get that? Hubbada, 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 hubbada? No. DNA is absolute evidence of the presence of the bug. So when you get a PCR positive, be it from Quest or LabCorp or anybody else, you have the active infection. Do not allow your doctor to ever say to you, oh, it's dead bug, even though it's PCR positive. I am pretty well trained in molecular. I can give him a quick course on how stupid that response was, because he obviously hasn't read a molecular biology journal or anything in medicine since HIV was found for testing. If you have a positive PCR, you have an active infection. Unless your kidneys haven't worked in the last 3 months. Okay? It would have been clear. So, what is PCR? What we do is we're so cute in molecular. We love to use fancy words. We take the DNA, which is that thing you see on there and on Big Bang Theory, and we actually pull it apart. We call it, there's a fancy words we call it. It's just a nurturing. We pull the thing apart, and then we cut it using these scissors, which we call enzymes, which cut it in specific spots, and only in those specific spots. Then we use a thing called primer sets, which are actually little pieces of DNA that are specifically complementary to the little ends of what we've cut off. And what happens is when you throw all these things together into something we call the thermocycler. Henry Ehrlich won the Nobel Prize for this in 1987. And what happens is the DNA, those primers with the sticky ends grab on. Thermocycler makes an exact mirror image of what's between them. We do a second cycle and those 2 become 4. Third cycle, 4 become 8. For HIV in a molecular, in a micro lab, we will do usually 25 of those cycles. For Lyme disease, Igenix uses 3 sets of primers, not 1. We do it at 2 different temperatures, looking for plasmid and genomic DNA. And we do 50 cycles. And voila, we look for more stuff, we find more stuff. And in our case, the average LabCorp or Quest test, because I used to run one the same way at my lab in both Gaithersburg and my laboratory up outside, up there in New Britain, Connecticut. We get a positivity rate in active Lyme infections in the patients in about 10 to 15% of the cases. That's way too expensive for a test that much. It doesn't make financial sense to do it. With Igenix's test, we get the right answer in those cases in about 35, maybe 40% of the patients, and especially if their immune system is suppressed. For obvious reasons, there's more Borrelia running around. So, but it's not the end all. We got a fancy name for it, it's called multiplex. Does it work? Well, yeah, it works pretty good. Our sensitivity is real good, and specificity is right off the chart. Specificity, if you get a positive, it's almost 100% accurate from any laboratory. Sensitivity is the shortfall, and it's because of the sample and the sample integrity. So, we have found, and not us, Tom Schwann, who did a lot of the work before Willie Bigdorfer, and Tom was pipetting with me up at the wonderful institution up there outside of Cambridge. He went to work at the Rocky Mountain Lab and became a great scientist. I wasn't anywhere near as good as him. So he published years ago that he was able to find, using the work at the CDC, Borrelia in the urine of blood and urine of humans and mice and dogs in active infection. So what he did was he developed a test called an antigen capture. And he, Dorward and others, Dorward is at University, I don't know where Dorward is now, but I know he was, actually I think he might have been at the Mayo for a while, but he left there a long time ago. They developed an immune capture assay, we call it the Lyme dot blot, and it looks for Borrelia in the urine. Is it good? Well, it's pretty good. Specificity is about 89%, sensitivity is about 50%, but our laboratory director came out, she came out of Harvard too, so she is a brilliant, I think, pretty brilliant woman. She added 23 and 39 polyclonal antibodies, and we got a sensitivity and specificity that's pretty good. So we got a pretty good test here if your immune system isn't working. If you've never gotten a positive lab test, this is the test your doctor may want to use, either with an antibiotic challenge, and you can get those challenges from Burascano's got one, Ligner's got one, I think you might, I don't know if Richard put it in his book, Dr. Horowitz has one. Other doctors use this test when they can't get a positive any other way and they really want to prove to the patient that it's Lyme. This is the test they will use. So which test is appropriate? Well, according to Dunley, if you got $100,000, you can spend it and get all of them. I'll tell you that the Western blot from Igenix is going to pick up well over 90% of the cases of Lyme. Okay, you'll have to add the PCR in those patients who are really sick, and then maybe have to go to the urine dot blot assay, but you're still going to miss some because some people never seroconvert, and we just can't find the bug. So, yeah, I'm not going to bother you with that. So, you have a laboratory up here that a lot of your doctors have tried to use, and your Attorney General has been diligently doing his job, as have CLIA and others. They have been fined $8 million first and now $6 million, and in January they are going to be sentencing the owner of that lab. So I will not mention that test or what it does, but it is a T-cell monitoring test, and the lab is located here in your state.
Is it an ASIO?
I'm not going to mention the test. Okay, the monitoring and treatment is what it claims to be able to do. Now, I know I'm not that bright, and I've only been doing this since 1991. So, I'm going to talk to you about another test that we offer that does the same thing, and it does it just as limitedly as that. This is not a panacea. Now, I love Ray Stricker, I love Ginny, and other people who think this test is God's gift to medicine. It is not. I actually had one physician in outside of in DC area that I stopped accepting samples from him. I refused to. I seldom would send them to somewhere else, because all he wanted to do was do a CD57 NK cell to prove people had Lyme disease. It is not that specific. Okay? It is a clear indicator of immune response. I will give that to you. That is not the issue that your lab here in the state has. It does an indicator of immune response, but it is absolutely not an indicator of Lyme disease in at least 20% of the cases. It's going to pick up 80%, but it's still going to miss a significant number. And in our hands, for the last 10 years that I've been doing this, and before that when I used the flow cytometer at my lab doing this, in Connecticut, no, it's not that accurate. But it does, if you're going to use, okay, let me explain what a CD57 is, because you're all going to be as dumbfounded as, okay, CDs are cluster differentiations. You have T cells, B cells, and NK cells. They run around in your body looking for something that's not supposed to be there, grab onto it, they call it engulfing it, take that data back to your lymph nodes in your brain, they start to develop an immune response. There is a cascade of an immune response, because you cannot have antibodies against everything. You wouldn't have enough room in your body. So what this does, the cascade takes those T cells, your B cells, and your NKs, and these CDs are clusters of molecules that sit on them, and they cause the differentiation of, say, a T cell to go after mycoplasma. It changes it to a certain way so it grows into becoming a mycoplasma-specific attacker. And that's what this cascade starts to top. The further up that cascade you go to the T cells and the NK cells, the less specific you are. The body's immune system is not rigged to, from the beginning of the immune response, immediately go after that one bug. It has to go through this cascade as it develops antibodies against everything in your body that's not supposed to be there. Okay? CD57 are a group of cluster and molecules that are a specific kind of shape and size and number that sit on NK cells. And when an immune response problem shows up, it immediately starts to differentiate the NK cells and direct other cells toward T cells and B cells to differentiate to whatever immunological problem the host is seeing. So it is not specific to Lyme. It is specific to an immunological issue. Okay? So not all CD57s are the same. You cannot use Quest laboratories for this. I have a personal friend, and I worked for Nichols for a number of years, and the guy who runs the Nichols Institute for Quest is Pandian, was an old friend. We were way too old together. And when I spoke with him, he told me the thing. They do a mathematical equation. They do a T cell and a B cell, and they make a mathematical equation to give you NK cells. It don't work. That is not an accurate measure of CD57 NKs. LabCorp does an accurate measure. So if you want to use LabCorp because your insurance company will take it, go to the LabCorp test, it's accurate. Other than us and LabCorp, I cannot validate any other test. And certainly, we know that the Quest test does not look at CD, even though it says it, it's not accurately looking at it. So, what we're doing is monitoring your immune response with it. Usually. Okay, but not all the time. And these cytokines, interleukins, they all play the fact in this orchestra of making your body change. One of the things Borrelia does is it goes around the back of your immune system onto this cascade, and it starts to effectively try to decrease interleukin 10. It increases IL-1, 2, 12, and TNF-gamma, and all of this mucking up of your immune cascade is trying to be put into some type of perspective by something called T regulatory cells, and these things are just trying to get this thing in order, and your body's immune system starts to get weaker and weaker and weaker. Borrelia is a very deadly smart bug. And when it does that, all of the cute little other things that were punched into your body by this monster now start to become what we know as opportunistic infections. And so the three major ones you will see are the anaplasmosis, including human granulocytic ehrlichiosis, the two strains of Babesia, which are both here, not just one strain. You cannot let, I'll talk about that in a minute, and the cat scratch or Bartonella. Now, how bad is it? Well, the Scapularis will transmit all of these, and including Powassan. And here is the surveillance from, they don't want to give this anymore, so this is the last date I could see in it. And we can see that anaplasma is here, Babesia is here, and Rocky Mountain Spotted Fever is here. No one even tested for cat scratch fever. And I can tell you, if you send us ticks, I know that 4 years ago, Richard Horowitz sent me a bunch, and we did PCR on them for cat scratch, and voila, more ticks in the Hudson Valley had Bartonella in them than had Lyme.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is here, it is in those ticks, and no one's testing for it. Okay, because the state does not have any money, and they can't test for it. So, co-infections, Minnesota, yeah, they're everywhere. So let's talk what you should do before you go ordering a bunch of lab testing. I tell doctors this all the time. Don't go ordering a bunch of Igenix panels if you're dealing with patients who have, limited resources for sure. And it's not, in my mind, ethical to do that. So I talk doctors out of testing every day. I'll tell them, look at the symptoms and make a clinical diagnosis, and then order a test to confirm that if you need to. Now, for anaplasmosis, most people, not all, according to Richard Horowitz and Joe Burriscano and the other ILADS members that I've known since the early 90s, all find that if you have a sharp headache right behind your eyes like somebody with an ice pick, please be tested for anaplasma, Ehrlichia. Okay? If you've got muscle soreness, not joint, Now, we're all going to doctors who practice 7-minute medicine. So they spend more time touching their computer than they do you. They don't ask you questions, they ask how you feel. And you say, my arm hurts. You need to know if it's joint pain, it's Lyme. If it's muscle pain, it's anaplasma. Okay? Or ehrlichiosis. It's not, muscles are not a major cause of pain, especially in arms or legs, from Lyme disease. It's anaplasma, which is one of the major co-infections. Those are the two big ones, and you'll also find that your temperature stays up all day long with anaplasma. Okay? So the variation in temperature is usually an indicator of only one disease, the Borrelia burgdorferi infection, or one of the other strains, which cause all the same symptoms. But if the temperature stays level, a little high all the time, you no doubt have co-infections. And we know they are seriously here, but the one that scares me the most is this one. And boy, it's so scared it doesn't want to show you. Babesiosis. This is a parasite that is every bit as insidious as Lyme. It occurs as malaria-like infection, and it also goes after your immune system, so your immune system's got a double whammy going after the cascade. Not only Lyme, but this one. This will usually present with a global headache that pounds like a migraine. It should present with a temperature of 105, 104. Sometimes it doesn't. It's always at 101. But almost always one of the other symptoms of completely being exhausted, having an air hunger, a dry cough, or night sweats once a week appear with this bug. Now, if you go to the doctor and they give you doxycycline at a bacteriostatic dosage, which is what some of these guys do for Lyme, which is an underdosing against this strong bug, you're going to slow this down. You're going to slow down your anaplasma, but it ain't going to kill it. And babesiosis is a malaria-like bug. It needs malaria-like drugs. The doctor has to go after this with Mepron, Cliniquin, or other malaria drugs. This is not a cute little disease that they can just misspell. And the good news is, if you've really got it and they do a right test, they can find it. Now, what are the right tests? The best test is done in a lab at the hospital by a pathologist who knows how to read a malaria smear, not coming to Igenix or any other reference lab. When your doctor, you go into an emergency room, or your doctor thinks it's babesia, they should immediately be sending you over to the hospital, having the lab there draw a sample, have the pathologist delay his start of his golf game for an hour, and read it on a smear called the Giemsa stain. If he does that, he will get one of these. It's called a Maltese cross on the blood, showing that's a babesia infection. Then, the pathologist, all he really has to do after that, as he gets into his golf cart, is call the primary or the infectious disease guy, who will then know how to treat it. And infectious disease physicians will treat this bug appropriately when they get the result from the pathology department. So that's why I always tell you, if you think you've got a babesia, we do a pretty good job because we do a fish test, and I'll talk about it in a minute. But the really best way to do this is make your doctor send you over to the hospital, make them draw the blood, and have the pathologist do a smear, and your insurance will cover it. Okay? Don't send it off to be paid for out of your pocket, or to a lab such as Quester LabCorp or anywhere that might do a good job, because the other testing that's available is indirect. Now, we do PCIs and we do FISH, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But most labs are going to do this: a microti, IgG, and IgM. Also, some might do a Duncanny, most won't. Quester LabCorp, you order a babesia, you're going to get a microti, and that's all you're going to get. Now, here's the problem. Microti and Duncanny don't cross over, these two strains. So you could have Duncanny and get tested for babesiosis and get a negative test. And you could have a raging strain of babesia in you. It might kill you in a few years, or 6 months. And you know what? The doctor's going to say, well, it can't be babesia. We got a negative test. You need to make sure, if you're going to send it out, because they don't want the pathologist to ruin his golf game, you got to get them both. They have to do both McCarty and Bacani, but my problem is, honestly and ethically, the slides don't work. The Babesia slides that are out there that are being sold in the United States, the only lab that's selling them anymore, the company, and it's not Abbott, but it's one of the others, one of the big lab kit companies. The slides don't work. They're very horrible, the sensitivity's bad, and in the hands of a tech who doesn't know what he's doing in a lab, like Quester Lab Corp, who may not be as fastidious about making sure everything's right, the probability of getting an accurate test drops even further. So, Peter Krause, when he was at Yale, or actually before he was at Yale, Peter was at UConn, up next to where we were, and Peter was a good guy. He developed the fish test, because he's one of the world experts on Babesia, and he's Associate Chief of Infectious Disease at Yale now. And Peter knew that his pathologists could read blots, but weren't necessarily, and read some smears, but not necessarily good ones. So he developed, using fluorescent in situ hybridization, this fish test. Fluorescent in situ hybridization means you're looking for RNA. You're looking for pieces of RNA that are absolutely specific to a live bug. And therein lies the difference between PCR for babesiosis and PCR for fish for babesiosis. Fluorescent in situ hybridization looks for RNA. RNA is active live bug. So when you get an RNA positive fish test from anywhere, I know Yale does it now, of course the guys at UConn, I know they're doing it at Mass General and out at Stony Brook, and I think Columbia Medical Center is, I don't know if anybody out here is looking at this. They should be, and that's a very good accurate test. He developed it because it's about 10 times more sensitive than looking through a scope. Even a well-trained pathologist can't pick them all up. Now the last one I'm going to bore you with is Bartonella, because it's here. And if your hands burn for an hour in the morning, or your feet burn, not talking 5 minutes, okay? We're talking an hour, 45 minutes an hour. You can hardly put your foot down. Take your fingers and run them on the outer side of one of your extremities, legs or arms. If you feel tender skin nodules, please go get tested for Bartonella, because that is the infection you more than likely have. Now the doxy that you put on for Lyme is going to slow it down, but the moment you're off it again, all of these three wonderful infections are going to come back, and that's why people relapse with all the symptoms. They don't address all of these bugs. Horowitz calls it, he uses the fancy name to look at all the different things. He used to call it Lyme bingo, or all the nails, you had to get them all out of the way. Well, if your doctor would just look for these, instead of practicing 7-minute medicine and asking you how you feel, and how's the family, yeah, your medication's okay, yeah, come back in 6 months, we'll be fine. Oh, and if you need anything, just call up, we'll order your prescription for you through CVS, okay? Okay, I'll see you in 6 months, go away. And that's 6-minute medicine, and that's what the insurance company pays for. And the larger the group you go to, the more you're going to end up with that kind of treatment. Because those doctors are driven, they're not being run by medicine men, they're being run by chief financial officers who are looking at the bottom line. And they've got to stay profitable, and the insurance company is only going to pay for 7 minutes of their time for you in front of them. And if the doctor takes any more time than that, he's going to hear it from his CFO and his colleagues. So that puts pressure on those guys who may want to spend time with you and take a really good physical and do all the right things. Their pressure is that they better not. Because if they take too long, they're going to hear from the financial group at the quarterly meeting or at their monthly review meeting where they go get together, and that's going to be an issue. So they are under the pressure. The larger the group, the more pressure they have to treat you as less of a human, and for 7 minutes or less. So Bartonella, if you saw this, that's Bartonella. Or you could actually see this, which is why we call it cat scratch. Those are cat scratch. Now, if your doctor could spend more than 7 minutes, he'd see these. This is not a stretch marks. This is Bartonella. It's going a different direction than the stretch mark. It's raised in red. We often see it behind the knees and behind the shoulder blade. When you see those little red marks stretch, it's more than likely a case of the Bartonella, and your doctor needs to test for it. Bad news again. The slides for Bartonella not so good. We do a pretty good test. We have actually had to build our own Bartonella slides now. We developed a fish test also with some guys from a couple of the major teaching institutions, including Stanford. And we have a fish test that works really well for this now. And but again, make a clinical diagnosis. If he sees those, you should be treated for Barton. Now, when I talk about treatment now, remember, I'm not a clinical physician. I have watched, I don't play one on TV, but I have watched since 1991 this environment, from being able to work closely with a number of the top line liver doctors in the world. And I sometimes, often can't, try to keep my mouth shut so that I can hear things and listen, and I do with most of them. And I've learned over the years that, well, I actually learned this in a textbook that your doctors seem to have forgotten. Well, Borrelia burgdorferi is a smart bug. So doxycycline is a bacteriostatic drug, which means it slows down an infection, especially at a bacteriostatic dose, which is 1 to 200 milligrams a day in an average human being, adult. What does that mean? Well, when you go to your physician and he's treating you for Lyme, your primary is going to give you 1 to 200 milligrams a day of doxycycline for 14 to 21 days. Borrelia burgdorferi has a life cycle of 25 to 28 days. You haven't covered it with 21 days, and you've only tickled its fancy by not killing it. You've been throwing a booster for your immune system, which is already fully under assault. And you want to know why we have an epidemic of people with late stage and chronic Lyme. They take this bug as if it's syphilis, and it can be easily treated, and it's minor, and we get what we've got today. An epidemic that's out of control. And one of the reasons most of you are probably here, I'm sorry. Rocky Mountain spotted fever, yeah, it comes in mosquitoes. You're going to see it. Not that often. You know, they kill every mosquito. They will bombard those suckers they will spray like we're in Vietnam, and it's the last days of 1971. We are going to Agent Orange everything in sight. We will kill every mosquito. You'll still get some infections. So when they do get Rocky Mountain spotted fever, this almost always appears. It is a rash that's on your hands, on your feet. You're going to see it. You're going to run to the emergency room. The doc's going to be real excited. He found a case of Rocky Mountain spotted fever that he can report, and he's going to treat you with doxycycline. And honestly, 2 to 3 weeks of doxy at a bacteriostatic dose is going to work for this. He doesn't need to go crazy. He doesn't need to overdose or give you a bactericidal dose of doxy or something else. That'll kill it. So that's what we say now. Many of your doctors are going to say, or some of them, are going to say, because they're not, or they're smoke screening. I'm not going to say they don't know, but they're smoke screening. Let's pretend they don't know, because smoke screening to me is a lie. Okay, so let's just say they don't understand. They will tell you, I can't use Igenix and I won't use them because they're not FDA approved. So, I always ask them, do you use the Mayo? Yeah, well they're not FDA approved. Do you use Quest? Yeah. Well, they're not FDA approved. Do you use a hospital lab? Yeah. They're not FDA approved. I have run 5 medical laboratories in my career. I'm that old. I'm older than dirt. I have run 5 of them. Not once has the FDA come to any of my laboratories or sent me a notification telling me they're going to try to get me approved. There's no such thing. The FDA approves kits and tools and instruments that are used in a lab. They do not FDA approve a lab. And if you're running an in-house assay like Stony Brook or us, or UConn used to, or Yale used to, before medicine made it financially unfeasible because pathology labs are no longer profitable for hospitals, if you're running your own in-house assay, they will get you clear licensing. Because you have to match the proficiencies that you're telling the state and the federal government and what you're doing. And they will come in and they will go crazy looking at you. Whereas if you're using a kit like Quest or LabCorp, all you got to do is stay between the buoys. As long as your tests work reasonably well and they don't go well below or well above the norms that they set, yeah, all your labs can do it. And so when the doctor tells you it's not an FDA approved lab, he's either doesn't understand or he is trying to dismiss you. Okay? When that happens, I'm going to strongly suggest you consider finding a new physician. Okay? Because you are going down a path where he's going to defer you anyway to the infectious disease department to wash you out of his hands. So, in Wisconsin, as in every state in the country, we are a full Medicare provider. We are also see people get reimbursed. When you get a letter back from Igenix thanking you for payment, it says across the top, please submit this to your insurance provider. The wording under there that none of us can read, the guys in the insurance company seem to understand. And many people will get reimbursed anywhere between 50 and 100% for our testing. So if you absolutely need it, you're going to get that letter, you've got to submit it. If you just send them the bill payment, you're not going to get reimbursed, because insurances love to take your money and hate to give it back. They don't make money. So, the thing I want to tell you most here is, really there are some really bad things that live in the woods. They, you know, you might see a few of those up at the top, you may even see a snake or two, but the ones you can't see are the ones that are going to hurt you the most. Okay? That cute little tick down there on the right is the one that's going to cause problems. So here, we would really like you people to take up hunting. Get outdoors. You have got to start killing these monsters. Don't just sit there and play video games. And I know we all want to watch the football games on Sunday, but we can't entrust the women driving SUVs to kill all these deer. They just can't do it. I'm just being facetious. Okay, don't get mad at me. I'm old. I can be a little bit. But, okay, we see a lot of them die on the roads. I know that in New Hampshire, over 2,000 to 3,000 deer a year are reported, and moose also carry this disease and are killed. But we need to thin this population of deer. That's going to be the only way we're going to get it. And at 1 million deer in this state, you've got to cut that out. People have to start shooting these guys, and we have to start quelling the turds. Because there's no other way. They have tried on Martha's Vineyard 3 years. They had posts where we put antibiotics on them, and the deer went running through, and yeah, we removed some of the ticks, but we made a whole lot of fat raccoons, because the feed that brought the deer brought the raccoons and the chipmunks, and they ate all the food, and the state couldn't afford to keep those post systems open, and they were terrified that some kid was going to run up and lick the thing, I guess. So we weren't allowed to use them long term. So those they don't work, but we do know that the deer population does work. A number of years ago, the vector control group at the University of Maine Medical Center, up in Maine, there's an island where everybody seemed to be infected with Lyme. So what they did is they went out and searched for deer ticks on the island, everywhere. They brought in hunters, killed every deer on the island, gave the meat to the homeless shelters to keep the more left-wing, I love the deer population at ease. And the next year they went and checked the tick population. It was half what it had been the year before. 2 years post-removal of all the deer, there were less than 3% of the deer ticks left on that island that had been there 2 years before. Deer tick has a 2-year life cycle. They cut it right in the middle, and 2 years later they were almost all gone. We can't go around killing 40 million deer, but we do need to quell them. If you see them in your yard, go to this website, who's a friend of mine, and it's called tickencounter.org. It's run by the University of Rhode Island, so it doesn't try to sell you anything. And Tim Mather is the head of entomology for the state and at the university, and he runs a really nice website on how to protect yourself and how to protect your yard and your kids when they're out in the yard or out running around. And you don't have to spend any money. They have tubes that you can buy that you can put permethrin from your local True Value or from your Home Depot, and you can build them and put them around your yard to protect them. Things you can put in your clothes. You don't have to go to Eastern Mountain Sport and spend $250 on a pair of pants. You can do it with just a little bit of spray. There are things that you can do to protect yourself, and you need to do it, and your family and your kids. Okay? Tickencounter.org is what I think is one of the better sites for this. They're not trying to sell you anything. Okay? So, Lyme disease is a tough diagnosis. My lab shouldn't be making it any harder. We try not to. And I just want to thank George. He's up there and does nothing else up there in Calgary. So he's the guy who did the videos that I showed you and the pictures. I got to thank him every time because he gave me those to use, and I do appreciate it. So the most dangerous test results are false negative, and thank you for all staying awake. Better than most residents. Thank you again. And if anyone has any, yes, you do, okay, first question, sir.
How asymptomatic or subclinical or not showing symptoms is Bartonella, and also Red Cross is in Wisconsin is testing for the bees now, you know, if the bees get tested or using.
Yeah, they're using an IFA slide. It's gonna pick up about 60% of the cases. It's up to you if you think that's good. I put a slide on this.
And then how subclinical is Bartonella?
It can be, you know, that's one of the, not as insidious on subclinical as Lyme often is, but it's close. And a lot of people never see a lot of the symptoms. They start to feel photosensitivity, they get nervous a lot. Have yourself tested for Lyme. Just be cautious.
Tested for what?
Bartonella, cat scratch.
Oh, if you have light sensitivity?
Yeah, if you're starting to move a lot like this, you're scared a lot, you become kind of nervous, not because the doctor tells you you should be. You know, you're sick, there's something wrong with you, but it's all in your head. If you're still not feeling good because of other reasons that are making you nervous and moving around, I strongly suggest you test for Bartonella. Your doctor should be, even if you're not having burning hands and feet.
So people with stronger immune systems aren't gonna be as symptomatic on just about anything.
Most of the, there's no 100% in medicine. I cannot say that. I've had, look, a CD57, I've had people with a CD57 of 10, which is close to 0. The normal should be well over 100. And I had one of them who just run a marathon 2 weeks before, had 10. And I had a woman come in a wheelchair, and her CD57 was 130. Not necessarily one thing. So your immune systems are all different. So it's just, I don't have the answers, okay? And the doctor who tells you he's got all the answers, he probably belongs to the Infectious Disease Society. He probably believes the Infectious Disease Society of America, and his colleagues have told him he walks on water, and when he walks down the hall, he can see light under his feet. Other than that guy, I'm not going to believe any of him, okay?
I heard with the CD57, at least what my doctor said, is that not only is there a difference in people, but there's a difference in you. So if you're going to use that test, you should do it pre-treatment,
Of course.
middle of
That's
treatment,
exactly what you should do.
after treatment, so
Yeah,
that you
a
have a
doctor
comparison.
Who knows what he's, and don't use, if you use LabCorp, do not use Igenix for the second one. If your doctor wants to send it to LabCorp, you do it again with LabCorp. But do it with the knowledge that it may not be Lyme that he's curing.
Right.
Your immune system's getting better, hopefully. But if I boost you with a vitamin D 125, or overdose you in a high dose of a couple other vitamins, I can change your CD57 with no other things going on. You go out and run, you get stressed out, you have a vitamin K deficiency, I will be able to change your CD57 with just natural products, or your doctor can. So the warning about all of these T-cell response tests that say they are the epitome, and some of my really close friends, guys I went to dinner with at ILATS, will swear that this test is great, has its limitations. And I just try to warn you that they say it's great, but there is one laboratory that has now brought the complete error of the Attorney General and a number of others, and they are, well, the man's going to jail. He's being sentenced on January 18th. So, other questions? Oh, no, good.
Well,
Okay.
I have one,
course.
just about the babesia. You had said, and I'm trying to remember now, something
It's
about
okay.
a couple of months. Just FYI, my husband and I treated that sucker for a year,
I know.
and Horowitz is finding that babesia is just super tenacious.
Oh, yeah, we know.
And so we did a combination of
Mepron,
Mepron, which
and
is
Cliniquin.
golden, they
Or
call it
Plaquenil
liquid
flagyl.
gold.
You use Plaquenil or Flagyl?
We did use some Plaquenil, but we used artemisinin, a very strong
Yes.
form of artemisinin.
Richard has gotten really good at using natural and other products. You know, his connection with Zymogen and has been really good, knowledge both ways. You know, so I often tell patients, especially with chronic disease. A primary care doctor or an MD trained in classical medicine has virtually no training in natural products. It's not his fault. You can't learn everything. Your naturopathic physician, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. When you can get both of those focusing on you and working in conjunction, you have the best chance of cure, long-term, or at the very least, having a significantly better quality of life when they're done treating you. But one or the other, Fallon's got studies where we saw people on Rovi were suffering for literally 3 months. That 6 months later, their brain fog was back.
Yeah.
So, because they went cold turkey after it. You need the alternative, and God, 20 years ago, I would have had someone where I was trained would have washed my mouth out with soap before they tarred and feathered me and threw me in the Charles. But we know that you need both. Now, there is no person who's got chronic needs both. If you've had Lyme for over a year, it is not post-treatment Lyme syndrome, and the first doctor that tells you that, get out of the office. When they tell you it's post-treatment Lyme syndrome, he is telling you quietly that there's no Lyme left. We killed it all. Whatever you're feeling is all up here. Well, find another doctor that maybe, yes.
Okay, so the scenario is you got positive IgG, IgM early on, like 3 years ago, mid-treat, or you went to another Lyme litter doctor, did an IgM positive. This is like a year after you knew that's just like you said. IgM
It's
still
not that I'm bright, this is
after a
Groundhog
year.
Day to me, okay? I wake up the same Groundhog Day every day with the same, go ahead.
I know.
The same
so
questions,
you're 3 years into
And I
this.
can be here, I
What?
can be in Santa Barbara, I can be in Portland, Maine, and I'm gonna get the same questions. That's why I appear to like I know what I'm
I
doing.
know, so
It's
the
only 'cause
question
you asked me the
is,
same
you are,
kind of
here I am
questions.
3 years into this, what one of those tests would be worthy of, or worth doing, if any? Or
None. Nothing I offer you is gonna be helpful, period.
just
That's,
don't
stop
retest,
spending
don't-
money on testing.
Yeah, just don't.
Right now.
Yeah.
Now, you could do a CD57 NK cell to see how your immune system's going. And then 3 to 6 months down the road, repeat it and see what your CD57. And if everything else is going okay, and it's going up, the immune system's getting better even if you don't feel better. If it isn't, I can't absolutely say that it's, I don't know. I just don't. And that we don't know. And I'm sorry, and we really wish we did. If it was easy, we would have cured it by now. If there was a pill we could give you, that would, I swear, we would have gotten it, even if we had to send it out to country.
So,
to
isn't
get
it true though that like chronic viral infections could come into play, where your Lyme is kind of under control, or it's resolved, but
I
now it's a
see
chronic
all
virus?
the time,
If you're,
far more than you want to know. The Lyme is under control, and some other episode affects the immune system. Borrelia burgdorferi, I didn't get into this, has these, I showed you a little snip on it, it's called plasmids. Those are pieces of DNA that stick off the sides of this spider. And when it's in the cyst form, it literally breaks them off, and every few days sends them out into your blood. Why does it do that? Because it wants to know if your immune system sees it. And if your immune system is strong enough, it gives an immune response, its mother stays in the cyst, ain't coming out. If it isn't, it's going to come back out. So, you get a virus, you get something else. Your immune system is holding this bug, Borrelia burgdorferi, in check in the cyst. And all of a sudden, you need surgery. You have severe stress. You get a virus. And all of a sudden, all of your bunch of your lymph nodes have to start acting against this virus and stop paying attention to building IgGs to go after the plasmids. Bingo. Plasmids come out. Here we go again. There's nothing to hurt them. Out comes some of the broiler. And they start moving around, spreading around to other parts of your body. This is the most insidious spirochete we have ever found. It has been around for well over 1 million years. No, I don't believe, I actually worked with the U.S. Armed Forces group down in Quantico and at their level 3 laboratory over there when I ran my lab, the Biotech Research Lab in Gaithersburg. No, I do not believe that an island off of Connecticut is where we got this plague. We have seen in publications back 100 years ago in Europe, before Lancet was even thought of people with symptoms that mirror image exactly of Lyme. Of course, they found it in a bug in what a man they dug up that was 30,000 years old. They found it earlier. So it's been around. It just hasn't had the ability to move around like it has, but it has now. And we are completely stressed. Our immune system, 100 years ago, we didn't have cars running around. We didn't have McDonald's. We weren't eating food that had been processed and been given antibiotics from the day the thing was hatched or born. And the grain we ate wasn't cleaned up so that some bug won't get on it. All of these things that we live in an environment affect our immune system. One by themselves has no effect. But when you add them all together, your immune system is already beat to death. And that's what I believe is one of the major reasons bugs like this are so prevalent and getting stronger. Because we as humans are doing our best to help them.
And that along with global warming, you think?
The global warming is probably helping the bugs grow. Borrelia likes warm weather, and then it's warm, and they like the sun. They don't like the sun, they like it wet. So they're kind of like cools them, a lot of oxygen and stuff. But the global warming is, that's probably having a part of it. I believe it's mostly the food supply. Because our immune systems used to be much stronger. Come on, penicillin used to work great on everything. 80 years ago. What have we seen change in 80 years? I know what's changed. Every animal you eat, piece of meat you get at a Stop and Shop has been injected. Before that animal was 6 weeks old.
And there's resistance too.
And it learned. The bugs get stronger and we get weaker. It'll outlive us all. It's gonna outlive me.
I thought Babesia was easier to treat because it's in the blood.
Well, it's easier to treat if you go after it but you gotta go after it with Mepron, Cliniquin, malaria drugs. I mean, we're not talking giving a kid a little dose of Tylenol. These are serious medications that have other consequences when used inappropriately.
Well, yeah, it kind of has the same symptoms as malaria.
Well, yeah, it is a parasite just like it. And they're very similar structure.
I think when you couple it though with Lyme and you couple it maybe with some BART, then you've got a real monster.
Yeah, and that's why you really need a Lyme literate doctor who's gonna spend the time with you.
And what I discovered, at least in my journey, is that I got the Lyme kind of under control, and then the Babesia type stuff came out. I didn't even have those symptoms initially.
No, of course you
They
do.
came out later.
Well, they
So
came-
it's kind of like, that proverbial peeling back the onion. That truly is a great picture. The other thing I wanted to tell you is if you haven't signed the clipboard, please do so because I will give you an invite to the website. And just as he spoke about how we pretty much need to use it all now, it's not just antibiotics, it's not just one thing. What I've tried to do is if you type in the search bar Bartonella or Mycoplasma or whatever, I lay out treatment options. I'm no doctor, but there's options that you can print it off, take it to your doctor, talk about it. I try to take the best of the best. I read books, I read Singleton and Horowitz, and then what I do is I take their info and just put it out there so that when you do go to your doctor, you can at least have a talking point. And there's herbal options on there as well. So I'm gonna pass this back around if you aren't on the
We have a couple
website.
good naturopaths here in Madison.
Yes,
Okay, don't be afraid to use them. I like Hank, he's a good guy, and his associate, Dr. Georgia is his name, and, yeah, Rebecca, yeah. Good people, real good.
sometimes you need both.
Yeah, the good news is, they're not under the thumb of the American Medical Association. Okay, now, that's a good thing. So the infectious disease guy at the hospitals can't go to them and say, you're in trouble. I'm bringing it before medical review board, because they can, which they're not, because they're polite. I, on the other hand, would tell them to go. It's appropriate.
Someplace warm.
Someplace warm, and I'm old and ornery, like I tell people, when it's just how it is. So thank you again, and I'm sorry you're in this journey. I'm glad you've got each other to help. It's a good asset. And if any of your doctors ever have the guts to speak about Lyme or want to learn something, please do not be afraid to tell them. I'd be delighted to come and speak with them. Marcus is up here on a regular basis. I am all over the United States now because someone's got to do it, and Canada now. They don't have the, do you realize that there's no Lyme in Canada? That's what they told me.
Or Australia, just not there.
Not there. It was not, it got ugly. So, no. So, at least you have a reality that there is Lyme here, and some of the doctors actually believe it. Most of them don't know how to treat it, but at least it's time to believe it. And we just came from ILADS where there were over 800 doctors. I can remember the first 3 ILADS where the only people there were the 40 or 50 of us who were actually speakers, because they were the only people who would listen to each other. So Richard speak, then he'd sit down. Broscano get up, he'd sit. Then I let him get up. How many people lit? Now we have 850, and it's getting bigger every year. Okay, the fundamentals course, which is what primary care doctors should go to, filled up 4 months before the conference.
Wonderful.
We had over 350 doctors who wanted to learn Lyme 101. These are the guys who were going to get lost as soon as Horowitz opened his mouth, but were fine to learn the basics and learn when to pass the patient on. So ILADS is on its way. You can't deny it. And the strongest thing I can say, your primary is under the thumb of the Chief of Infectious Disease and the AMA. You are not. Your ability to affect laws and force legislature is significantly stronger than you give yourself credit for. Because there's nothing a politician fears more than a group that has one reason to vote him in or out of office. And if you as a group, like in Connecticut and in Maine and New Hampshire and in New Jersey, got together and said, hey, we want to know what you're going to do about this. We do not necessarily care so much about the economy or how you feel about how we deal with Russia. But we really do care about this. How are you going to vote? And don't let him say, oh, I'm going to ask the guys at the experts, because that means he's going to defer to the infectious disease guys. Okay? Don't let him get away with that. And when you don't, and you hold their tail to the fire, they tend to vote to keep their jobs. And when laws change to protect, like Waters and the other doctors and the few that have lost their licenses in this state or other states, when the laws change to protect them, the more routine doctors then change their minds and literally start to recognize Lyme and are no longer as afraid, still afraid, but not as afraid of the powers in the Infectious Disease Society of America. But it starts with the grassroots.
Yeah, and we are working on that. There should be another public hearing in 2017
You know,
coming up
the hint
here.
I'm going to give you is what almost happened in Vermont until I heard. Do not allow a hand vote in any action against or for Lyme disease. You want a written vote, so that when that state senator gets in there behind the closed door, he can't say, do you vote for it? And do this. He has to write down, I voted no, I voted yes. Because that's public knowledge, and then you can decide whether you want him to be reelected next year. And he knows that. So they will try, as they did in Vermont 2 years ago, to cause it to be a hand vote in closed session. They didn't allow it. They made a lot of noise, got to the newspapers, got some activists up there in the state capital of Montpelier, and wow, it had to go through, and guess what? Laws got passed, doctors are now allowed to treat. Doctors, friends of mine who have literally been censured or told out, would today be able to practice medicine and treat people appropriately. But if you entrust this to the American Medical Association, you are in trouble, okay? Because they are driven by the insurance companies and profit margins. Sorry. That's what you hear, and the group is better than that.
I have
Thank
one
you,
other
Deb.
question for you. For a person who treated and is asymptomatic, do you
Yeah.
recommend any testing?
No, there's no test in school, none. You're wasting money. Me, anybody else, is wasting money, please. I tell doctors all the time, no symptoms? Make sure they stay on their probiotics and the other things from there. Send them to a naturopath, okay? Instead of sending me $300 or $400, go visit a naturopath who'll give you a good diet and a good food to eat, and then follow that. And I don't ever want to hear from you again. I don't want another test from any of you coming back through my lab doors. Okay? I want you to put me out of business because I don't have anything working there. Okay? I really do. Anyway, I'm getting old. I don't know. Just kidding.
So if you don't want people to test, how are they supposed to know what they're dealing with?
At that late, specific cases. In early Lyme cases or mid-Lyme cases or where you're showing chronic disease symptoms, you need to test to differentially diagnose appropriately so that you know what you've got. Because one of the biggest things we've always had is that, oh, you don't have Lyme, but we don't know what you have, so go away. Or go see the psychiatrist. Prozac is not a treatment for Lyme disease, regardless of what a doctor tells you. And OxyContin is also not a treatment for Lyme disease. So if your doctor is aiming you toward treating the symptoms to keep you away from him and, keep you placated, find another doctor.
Well, that's what I did, but I did a whole lot of testing through.
He did that because of a reason. Because he wants to make sure.
No, I did that. He didn't do that. He told me just to go away, and I went ahead and did all the testing.
Well, see, doctors like Horowitz, Linger, and all my friends, they do a lot of testing because there are, like us, there are a number of IDSA doctors and other groups that would love to see Igenix out of business. And they'd like to see the Lyme literate doctors either be put on a boat and sent to some other country, or shot, or put in jail, or at the very least, have their licenses removed. But because we stand together and they do the testing to make sure they've got from a valued, clear, licensed, accredited laboratory, positive lab tests, and they keep their records straight, the IDSA can't get out, no matter how hard their lawyers try. And that's why doctors do all the testing. And the dangerous part is when you get the false negative from Quest or LabCorp, because then you're going down a path, and if your doctor tries to treat you, what do you mean you treat him? The test is negative. And that's where it goes. That's why you need to test.
Well, the regular doctor wouldn't treat me at all, but then I went to an ILST doctor and to Dr. Dorfa and Dr. Meeble, and so.
Good. Good. Thanks. Yes.
Can you go over the Bartonella testing again?
Okay.
Just-
There is, Bartonella is the major strain we see in the United States. That's the one you got mostly everywhere, and there are other strains, but it's not going to, it's going to cross. The Henselate test kit, there's only one in the United States right now available that every company has to use. When I say company, Quest, LabCorp, your hospital down the road,
Yeah.
the kit stuff. Okay, that's straight English, I think everybody understands that. They're going to pick up 60, maybe 70% of the cases.
Yeah.
Reason we developed our own in-house IFA test and a fish test were because even with our own homegrown IFA test, Richard or someone would call and moan at me that I had a person with Bartonella and my test was negative. I need a better test. So we took some time and we really did develop a good fish test, and it picks up the active, okay? So I'm sorry we had to do that, but that's just how it is. The Bartonella slides are just horrible. The IFA slides that everyone uses.
I
So
heard
with
Galaxy
The
has,
Igenix one is pretty reliable.
Yeah, and don't do PCR. Please save your money.
Okay.
PCR is not, and the fish test gives you an active. The fish test, again, is RNA, so if it's an active infection, it usually shows up. And Bartonella is pretty active in the blood, doesn't go into hiding much. the fish test can pick it up. And we're finding it picking up in a lot of cases that are negative by IFA.
Okay.
I heard Galaxy has a triple
Galaxy does a
draw.
nice job.
Yeah,
He does a really good job with it. Bob's been doing them for years, and his laboratory is very good. The trouble is, he's a one-trick pony, and they've got some other issues going on. Good guy, high caliber lab. If you don't want to use Igenix for Bartonella, send it to Galaxy.
What
Either
about
one.
the Hermonsi, or the one that I have, I don't have Bartonella, but I have the AGRMIS, or whatever that one is. I can't even say it.
It's okay, dear, that's
My
all right.
brain.
That's all right.
What about that one?
What, I know you're gonna say it again. What was it?
The Hermonsi, or the?
Miyamoto, Hermsii.
Yeah.
You have the
Hermonsi.
Hermsii
Yes.
strain of Borrelia
Yeah.
burgdorferi, of Lyme disease.
Yes.
Okay, it carries the same symptoms. Its treatment is the same. Now, I know Hermsii is more robust. So your treatment protocol has to be a step up to help your immune system. Because Hermsii, over the years that I've seen it and heard about it from people, is that the treatment usually lasts longer and higher. But it's transmitted by the same tick. And I don't know if you tested with us to pick it up or not.
I tested with you, I tested with iSpot, I tested with LabCorp,
And who picked, did anybody pick it up?
they all did.
Perfect. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry you have the disease, but I'm glad we all picked it up. Okay? Hermsii, I worry about the Marnix blot, because in my long, painful career, I helped Dr. Markowitz do the FDA submission on that blot, which is the test used for Lyme by Quest and Lab. It's called the Marnix blot. That blot was built, and we built it, and changed its performance to meet the CDC criteria. Took out 31, 34, we did a bunch of cute things so that it became robust in early Lyme. Not so good for Lyme, and not so good for Hermsii. Because we didn't think it was big at the time. 94, we didn't know better. We still don't know better.
Well,
But even then, we knew
standard
less.
doctor said it was from a louse, not from a tick.
I'm not gonna, the entomology of where you got that, I know we see it in ticks. I've sequenced it out with labs, so yeah, we know it's in the tick too. You may have got it somewhere else. And please, I don't know, there are, you go ahead, there'll be more questions now about, can I get it from this or that? I don't know. Okay? I don't know.
Well, that's what he said at first, and they called me the next day and said, well, no, I think you're right, it is with the ticks, but in the office.
Thank you. I'm not
yeah,
gonna.
who cares? I got it.
Well,
Treat me.
You know,
But he was
it's
just trying
like,
to convince
it's like
me
the
that I
strain.
did it.
I'm one of those lunatics because we're kind of science
Sure.
guys, and we want to know,
Right.
what is it? Rather, and Horowitz always looks, and Lee, they look over me, and why? We don't care. Well, Richard does, because he's a kind of, but most doctors look at me and says, I don't care, I just got to treat the disease. Tell me what it is, I don't care what strain it is. If the treatment's the same, it doesn't matter.
It just matters for testing, either it may not pick it up.
For Babesia, it does.
Right.
And okay,
Right.
so, any other questions?
What do you know about Marcons? Do you see that Marcons happen very much with Lyme?
No.
No.
I'm sorry, no. So, I don't read much about it, I don't see much of it. And that may be my own shortfall, but I haven't looked into it deeply, sorry.
Okay.
Yes,
Is Bartonella similar to Brucella?
completely.
Completely different?
Yeah, Brucella we can cure, and Bartonella we can cure completely. Most doctors want to use Levaquin for, most ILADS trained doctors are going to go after Bartonella with a heavy drug. So you better have a good liver.
A good lever, what does that mean?
Well, they're going to want to go after it. Many doctors, not all, ILADS trained, as you know, they're all have their own protocols, which is good. They're all trying different things and trying their best to do what they think they know is right. But Levaquin over the years, which is a very dangerous drug to the liver when used extensively, has been the most, in the studies I've seen, double-blinded, the most effective tool against Bartonella. and that's a liver issue.
That, my daughter has chronic Lyme, she, like you've been tested all over, but right now, she is having terrible heart problems. She actually went to a cardiologist, and she's taking that drug you just said. Lever-
Levaquin.
Yeah, and that made it so bad the first few days when she was taking it. She said her heart felt like somebody, and she's a teacher, she said she actually started to cry in the classroom. Her heart clamped up so tight, and then it just slowly relaxed out. But she's still on it, and this has been about 4
Has she lost the
weeks.
cramping in her heart?
It's still
Has it gone
doing,
past?
it's a lot better now, it's been
How long
about
she
a
been on?
month. About a month, and still does some fluttering and, but
You know,
will
like,
it ever get better?
like most of the drugs, I get this call all the time from docs. My patient took the drug and now they've had it, they're really hurting. And I always smile into the phone and tell them, congratulations,
Yeah,
you found the bug.
right.
Because you're now killing it off and it's not getting clear. The problem in most of these cases is that there is problem in the person's gut. It can't clear the bug. If they'd gone to a good natural path first and gotten their gut clean before they hit them with the high-dose antibiotics, because when you kill bug, especially at a high rate, when you find the bug that's the drug that's going to kill it, it dumps it into your gut from everywhere all of a sudden. And if your gut is already clogged up, it can't clear it. And that's why you herxed. And that may be what happened with your daughter. Maybe, but I don't know that for sure. And yes, if your cardiologist reads the CDC reports, he should maybe remember back 2 years ago when he got the note from them, telling him in an endemic area for Lyme, and I trust he believes it's endemic here if he listens to anybody, then he should have tested for Lyme and been watching for it.
And she goes to a Lyme doctor here in Wisconsin, but she lives in the Quad Cities, so
Okay.
it's
There's
like,
a Lyme in Quad City.
no, they don't think so. So the cardiologist, she said, I told him I'm on medicine for Lyme, and he's
Oh,
like,
oh, that must have made him excitable. Yeah,
she said he had a student in there, so he was like looking at the student like, I don't know what she is talking about.
That is
you
just,
know, he was probably saying is the woman needs Prozac.
Probably.
That's the sad part.
Well, they're gonna do a CAT scan now of her heart
Well,
first week of
Yeah,
December,
they
but
find
I don't
some-
think anything will
I
show up.
hope they find some. I'm sorry, I do. I hope they find what it is. If it isn't Lyme, let's find out
Well,
what it is.
the Lyme doctor keeps saying it's Bartonella in your heart.
That could be.
That's what he says, it's Bartonella in your heart. So, but.
which
he
is
also
why
said-
Levaquin and Cipro and those fluoroquinolones work, is because they go deep into the muscle tissue where the bug is. And so unfortunately, the railroad track is you either are killing it and now you've got these heightened symptoms and you want to quit. Oh God, do you want to quit? Or it's something else. And this is the train track. It's like, what do we do? What do we do? I can't tell you how many times I wanted to quit treatment. I can't even begin because the symptoms are so horrific
All right?
and the blowback. And that's the challenge of this.
This book is way too smart for the rest of us. Sorry.
It's hard to know whether to keep pushing through or to pull back, but I'll tell you what, I know the people that quit and they don't get better. And I'm standing here and I'm better. So I did push through.
You gotta push through. And you
It
need the
wasn't
support of
fun.
the people around you and groups like this.
Yep, it wasn't fun.
People get better when they're in an area like a group like this. When you're off on your own, you look healthy, you feel healthy, or you don't feel healthy, but you look healthy, so your family thinks you're, there's nothing wrong with you. Go away. Don't go away, Matt, just go away. You're
Well, and unlike any other disease, if you have bronchitis, you take antibiotics, you start feeling better in 24.
fine. Yeah.
Why do you feel worse? Well, we know
Kill
why,
the
but when you're walking through the valley, it
First thing, clean up the gut. And like I say, that's heresy to me 20 years ago. But if you don't clean up the gut,
Yeah, and take a good probiotic.
Oh, but more than just a probiotic. You need a naturopath. If you've got chronic Lyme, you need a naturopath to really do a good workup. Because you've got to look for heavy metals. That's probably part, maybe even mold. Those are things that all have a serious effect on your gut, and that's got to get cleaned up first. Remember, if you don't do that, the antibiotics you take don't get absorbed. So they go running right through you, so you could be spending all this money on antibiotics and not getting better. Got to clean it up. First thing. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that supercharges your immune system, because most of your immune system is your gut.
It starts. Thank you.
Well, I know, thank you so
Thanks
much.
for listening.
I know that